Hi folks. You'll see in the video this week just some outstanding music, and I wanted to shout out and lift up Stephanie and Kevin who orchestrated that, created that, and filmed it even. Kind of did it all, and they did a great job, and I just wanted to lift them up for their work and creativity on behalf of our church. I also wanted to lift up, as we all know, it's been a heavy week. And our future, we know more stress is coming. In my sermon this week, I just kind of want to level with you. I went through, this was a hard one. I probably went through 3 or 4 different drafts. At one time I had a sermon that went almost 30 minutes, and I realized, well, that ain't gonna, nobody's gonna like that. And what I was trying to do was wrestle between 2 things. I wanted to wrestle with an analysis of what was happening to us as a people, as a country, and as a church. But at the same time, I also wanted to lift up, well, okay, in the midst of all this, we can get analysis. We get analysis all the time. Everybody's got an opinion. But in the midst of all of this, does the church have any of its own wisdom to offer its people for us to release and relief from this stress, and also power to move forward into the future? This sermon, I hope, is the latter, and I hope that you engage it, engage the meaning of the word depth that I tried to give it. I hope you engage that in your Zoom groups. So stay safe, stay alert. It's not all bad. God's on the loose. He's easy to spot.
You, Lord, are my constant and faithful companion. I need nothing more. You accompany me on paths of abundant beauty and in deserted hallways. You restore my soul. Even though I walk through this uncharted pandemic, I fear neither illness nor death, for you are with me. Your laws and your disciplines, they comfort me. You spread blessings before me in the presence of isolation and loneliness. You touch me with reassurances. My joy overflows. Surely I shall find and spread goodness and loving kindness all the days of my life, and I shall continue to worship and serve you in your universe of universes forevermore.
Hello, friends. I miss gathering with you. I miss hearing what you have to say. I miss all of those things that remind me that we are all part of one spirit, that we are all connected as parts of the body of Christ. 1 Corinthians reminds us that if one part suffers, all parts suffer. And if one part rejoices, all parts are glad. It's important for us to honor that connectedness that we have with all people. Imagine if I went to a doctor because I had broken a bone, and I told the doctor about it, and the doctor said, well, what are you even coming in here for? You have 205 other bones that are perfectly fine. Run on home. No good doctor would ever do that. In Luke, Jesus tells us about the good shepherd that has 100 sheep, and one of them wanders off to where it's alone. It may be in danger. And Jesus tells us the good shepherd would never say, well, most of the sheep here are fine. I'll just stick with these 99. No, a good shepherd knows that all are important and goes and takes care of the other sheep. We need to honor this connectedness by taking care of each other. And you all know that. You're doing it already with what we've been doing these past 3 months. You're honoring it when you stay physically distanced, when you wear a mask when you need to go out in public, when you stay home and stay safe. And that's important to do because we want to help everybody be able to breathe. And we know this virus can sometimes make it harder for people to breathe. You know, I've been thinking a lot about breath this week. Would you take a breath with me, please? In the book of Job, we are told, the power of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty gives me life. Take another breath with me, please. When we breathe in, we're breathing in more than oxygen. We're breathing in the very breath of God. We're breathing in spirit breath. And that's a gift from God. And no one has the right to take that gift from anyone else. God has given us many gifts. The gift of breath, the gift of our arms, the gift of our knees. Remember how the wise men used one of those gifts. When they first saw Jesus, they showed how wise they were by kneeling to humble themselves before Jesus. In Mark, a leper knelt to ask Jesus for healing. In Luke, Jesus himself knelt as he prayed to God. I've been thinking a lot about kneeling this week. I believe the gift kneeling gives us is it allows us to humble ourselves, not other people. It helps us remember that we are to love and serve other people, treating everyone with respect and justice and mercy. I believe that we are to lift each other up and we are to help each other breathe. Those are such wonderful gifts from God. And to celebrate those gifts, I'd like you to sing a little song with me. I think you'll catch on really fast. The first verse reminds us that we need to see Christ in each other. It goes like this. The Jesus in me sees the Jesus in you. The Jesus in me sees the Jesus in you. So easy, easy to love. We also need to listen to each other so that the Jesus in me hears the Jesus in you. The Jesus in me hears the Jesus in you. So easy, easy to each other. We can't do so in person right now, but we can hold each other closely in our hearts. The Jesus in me holds the Jesus in you. The Jesus in me holds the Jesus in you. So easy, easy to love.
The King of love, my shepherd is, whose goodness faileth never. I nothing lack if I am his, and he is mine forever. Where streams of living water flow, my ransom soul he leadeth, and where the verdant pastures grow, with food celestial feedeth. Perverse and foolish oft I strayed, but yet in love he sought me, and on his shoulder gently laid, and home rejoicing brought me. In death's dark vale I fear no ill, with thee, dear Lord, beside me. Thy rod and staff my comfort still, thy cross before to guide me. Thou spreadst a table in my sight, thy unction grace bestoweth, and oh, what transport of delight from thy pure chalice floweth. And so through all the length of days thy goodness faileth never. Good Shepherd, may I sing thy praise within thy house forever. Within thy house forever.
Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his power. Put on the whole armor of God, so that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the accuser. For our struggle is not against enemies of blood and flesh, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, so that you may be able to withstand on that evil day, and having done everything, to stand firm. Stand, therefore, and fasten the belt of truth around your waist, and put on the breastplate of righteousness. As shoes for your feet, put on whatever will make you ready to proclaim the gospel of peace. With all of these, take the shield of faith, with which you will be able to quench all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. Pray in the Spirit at all times, in every prayer and supplication. To that end, keep alert, and always persevere in supplication for all the saints. Pray also for me, so that when I speak, a message may be given to me to make known with boldness the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains. Pray that I may declare it boldly, as I must speak.
If you're feeling overwhelmed, you have every right. From the COVID virus to its consequence of a national economic collapse, to the unmasking of overt racism of police forces and our entire nation, to the militias who walk our streets, to the ominous, seemingly ever-present tension you can just feel in the air. And then, of course, the rage of young people looting and burning, and the continuing trauma created by our president's disregard of the Constitution and of moral decency. If you are simply feeling overwhelmed, overstressed, you have every right. I can tell you I certainly am. Our reality right now in this time and place is that we're under siege, a psychological, spiritual siege. And pretending that we're not only closes off our options and our possibilities to break through into a different reality. Pretending that we're not in a crisis, just trying to avoid it, trying to duck and cover, trying to say it's something out there, but it's not prevalent everywhere, including in our own block, in our own neighborhoods, and in our own lives. Pretending that we are not in crisis only sets us up to scapegoat someone else for all our troubles. Whether it is climate change or police brutality or this viral pandemic or unemployment or 400 years of white supremacy, how are we going to live faithfully when there is so much sickness and evil just unmasking itself throughout society? And that to me is the issue. How do we live in this moment the faith of Jesus? How do we live as a representative of Jesus, as the hands and heart of Jesus? I mean, we're talking to each other, church. This is about each other, church. As Christians, we represent Jesus through our own lives. We remind society to love its enemies, to create commonwealth, to tear down walls of hostility. Our baptism compels us to eradicate prejudice, prejudging others. So that there is no longer slave or free or male or female or rich or poor. We remind society that a society rooted in peace and justice creates an economy where everyone has their own vine and fig tree. A social order so safe that children can play in their neighborhoods and not be harmed. A healthcare system, a social welfare system for citizens so that elders, it will be normal for elders to reach 100 years of age. All of those are biblical visions. That's the idealism of the Bible. That's the shalom, the jubilee that they saw and yearned for. And we are called to embody those visions as best we can, calling the national soul towards the God of the poor and the last and the least and the lost and the left out. That's what Christians do. That's who Christians are. That's what Christians preach. And it's just like your offering to El Dios Viviente and your faithfulness to the safe parking program. That's what our own congregation is role modeling. That's what we're practicing. That's what we're preaching. But how do we continue to practice this faith while sheltering in place? In the midst of this crisis that is erupting throughout our nation, this shaking of our nation, in the midst of the overwhelming stress, in the midst of our fears and worries, in the midst of our depression and perhaps a sense of futility, in the midst of an overwhelming sense of powerlessness, in the midst of a temptation to duck and cover and sit this one out, how do we actually present Christ in and through our lives? What is the role of the church? And we are the church, not someone else. What is our role? A time of crisis is a time to draw upon the depth of your own soul, of your own character, of your own truest values and priorities. A time of crisis reveals your actual Christianity. And so I want to use that word depth to suggest 5 ways that we can explore our soul and overcome the overwhelming stress that threatens to cower us in this time of crisis. And this is what I'm hoping that you'll talk about in your Zoom churches. You don't need decrees from me to tell you exactly what to do. But I think you do need reminders. We all need reminders that God calls us to do our faith, not just to explore it, not just to think about it. But here are 5 resources. That first letter of depth is D. And in a crisis, we disrupt our normal way of life. We pull ourselves off autopilot. It's time to stop binge watching. We've done that for a couple months. It's time to stop. It's time to disrupt our normal way of thinking. For example, our normal way of thinking is to secure ourselves at all costs. We're under siege, so we have to pull even tighter together. We have to protect what we have, which also means that everyone outside of ourselves is a little bit suspicious, is a little bit guilty until proven innocent. All of our priorities become about us, saving us, protecting us, securing us. And we stay in our shell and we don't take the risks necessary to hear the stories of those we're being told to fear, told to blame. We accept the scapegoat crucifixions of the accused. We accept the poverty and violence that dominates African American communities. We accept the threats of 10-year sentences for young idealists who get caught up in riots and protests while never stopping to explore, how did all of this happen? How did it come to this? We stop asking that very important question, what needs to change so that God's promises come to all? What needs to change so that God's promises come to all? When violence begins, the tendency of folks is to simply stop thinking. One's Christianity, the nonviolence of Jesus, love one another, reconcile with one another, forgive one another, restore one another. All those visions about everyone having their own vine and fig tree, all of that kind of just goes out the window. We allow ourselves to be discipled by fear rather than faith. We need to disrupt those patterns of thought before we find ourselves imprisoned by them, imprisoned by our own fears and hesitancies. We need to disrupt our secular safety-first mindset and see things spiritually through sacred eyes that can see the new creation that is emerging beyond the cross. This is what I mean, practically speaking. Exploring our depths, disrupting our normal way of life requires an examination of our own way of life. But to examine our life, to take a look at ourselves, we're going to need something outside of ourselves. We're going to need an aid from outside of ourselves to help us explore, to help us examine. And the wisdom of the church has produced such an aid, a sacred storybook that provides this aid, that reshapes our imagination, our ability to see. We call this the Bible, and most of us are afraid of it. Sometimes we're afraid of it because we're ignorant. Sometimes we're afraid of it because we don't think that this book has any power. We've been listening to it all of our lives, and it has yet to transform us. We think that the Bible has little or nothing of interest or relevance in teaching us how to see the world, how to discern truth, how to expose lies. And even though this Bible was the sacred text of martyrs, and of King, and Romero, and Merton, and Bonhoeffer, and Hamer, and Day, even though this Bible shaped Western civilization, and shaped the philosophy of civil and human rights, and shaped a yearning for social justice, and shaped a spiritual narrative that believes redemption can come even to the filthiest of sinners, somehow it's not good enough for us. Somehow we are beyond all of that. The wisdom of our Christian faith has historically been renewed over and over and over again by re-enchantment, re-engagement with biblical study that teaches us who we are and why we're here. In this crisis, as our whole nation is being shaken, as the church is being shaken, a re-engagement with sacred story is critical. In this crisis, we need the wisdom of biblical engagement in order to discern and define and refine our values, to perceive our hope, not what we wish, but what we hope. We need the stories of the Bible to inspire our courage so that we have the capacity to resist all of those who are trying to dominate our imagination, to shrink it into categories that serve their interests, that try to force us to see the world according to the way they want us to see it. Rather, these forces be politicians or media outlets or market forces or military crusades or religious justifiers. We need biblical reflection, biblical engagement, so that we don't wind up like Cain, who kills his brother and then asks God, "Am I my brother's keeper?" The Bible teaches us about responsibility and the grace that we need when we fail. Why not join us on Wednesday mornings to explore this strange and different world that the Bible can open to our eyes. And if we're exploring our depths, we will also need to explore the mystery and the power of prayer. These are, perhaps a poor analogy, these are the weapons of the church. For many Christians, prayer seems so wimpy. Perhaps that's because so few of us have ever experienced prayer like Jesus did, who was so intense in prayer that he sweat blood. Prayer is resistance against the spirituality of the culture that tries to seduce us into conformity and obedience, into all those isms, that consumerism, nationalism, racism, these isms that build walls and divisions between us. Who can resist the world? Only those animated by another world. Prayer is our entrance into that other world. It's our portal to God, to transcendence. There is no spirituality, no communion, and certainly no Christianity without prayer. Prayer is the power that moves us out of our head and moves us into our heart, which motivates our feet and our hands. It moves us into a power greater than ourselves. And so why not join us on Tuesday mornings when we try to tap into this power? Deep in our soul is our spiritual testimony. Testimony is our personal witness. It's our personal stand up for Jesus, our personal acting out of our faith and hope and love. Testimony makes our private interior life a public example. It is the acting out of our inner truth. We do not just feel injustice. We stand up against it. We do not just feel compassion, we extend it towards others. We do not just sing kumbaya into our own heart, we enact it, especially to those who cry out to God, "Come by here." We stand up with our testimony of faith in the way of Jesus, even when it's not too popular. We stand up even to our family, our friends, our neighbors, strangers. We stand up even if we're the only one in the room when others are talking and plotting and laughing and scheming to crucify, to outcast, to blame, to shame, to shun. We give testimony that Jesus loves, that there is a power greater than fear and violence. There's a power greater than scapegoating and blaming and shaming and shunning. Having ourselves received mercy and forgiveness, we extend it to others in thought and word and deed. I want to give you an example. There are several, but I just want to give you an example. The current boogeyman is Antifa. The word means anti-fascist. It's a movement of deeply alienated, mostly young folk, mostly white, many from middle-class backgrounds, most living currently in poverty. And they're living in the perception that they have no future. But what binds them together is a moral opposition to all things centralized. In biblical language, it is a moral opposition to the spirituality of Pharaoh that unites these youth into a tribe. And Pharaoh isn't just the government. Pharaoh is also the consolidation of the market into those large, corporation-driven powers. Alienated youth feel enslaved by pharaohic forces that reduce them into a make bricks without straw economy, of jack-in-the-box jobs, of permanent indebtedness, a treadmill existence of production and consumption that continually speeds up with no respect for rest, what the Bible calls Sabbath, and no respect for inclusive equality, what the Bible calls the Jubilee. Antifa youth yearn for a new creation, a more relational world, a world where you can meet your neighbor and celebrate the diversity of human expression. Idealistic? Yes. They seek the promise of a new world. That ought to sound familiar to us. But their rage, their alienation, emerges from the reality that they clearly see that there is no future for them in the world as it is, and no future for them in the world that is becoming. For them, the social order has already collapsed. It is felt as deeply oppressive. They feel enslaved. We make a grievous mistake if we go along with this simple scapegoating of their rage as the outgrowth of domestic terrorism. It's deeper than that. Their hearts are broken. Their vision is blurred. Their voice is silenced. Their person is unseen and uncared about. And so they rage because it's the only sign of life they can muster. Now, I'm saying all this for a very basic theological reason. If the system of Pharaoh, those forces that crush the human spirit, that are the antithesis of creating shalom and jubilee, if Pharaoh is portraying them as the enemy, well, we Christians are called to love our enemy, to seek their welfare, their friendship, the heaven on earth moment of mutual forgiveness. Testimony is the refusal to crucify. And you'll make enemies. You'll lose popularity. But so did Jesus. In a crisis, Christians offer hope, some help. Hope is not putting on a happy face, wishful thinking. Rather, hope is trust in what is not seen. Hope has confidence that God's grace is at work in ways that we don't know, all the time, in every situation. Hope is the act of searching for and noticing those signs, small and great. Hope is encouraging and affirming others. Hope is laughing and loving and practicing kindness, even when all around you has become toxic. Hope is gratitude, even when the bottom falls out. Hope is not knowing whether or not everything will turn out all right. But nevertheless, one continues as best one can. Hope sees the resurrection beyond the cross and lives as if that resurrection has already occurred. Only a power greater than yourself can give you a power greater than yourself. And that's really what I'm talking about. In a crisis, disrupting your way of life, your normalness, examining yourself through biblical engagement, praying as a way of connecting with a power greater than yourself, standing up with your testimony of faith in the way of Jesus, even if others around you begin to scapegoat and shame and blame and shun, offering hope, the helping hand of your presence. That's the way to overcome the overwhelming stress pressing down on us in this present moment. This is no time to hide in your shell. This is no time to withhold the power of your creativity, of your imagination, of your capacity to love, your capacity for courage. If all hell is breaking loose, that must mean God is freeing someone from their misery. It must be resurrection time. Something new is being born. Don't miss this moment. We were made